G'day, I'm Keith Garner, and I'd like to share with you something of the story of Wesley Mission. In a large city like Sydney, people are too easily forgotten and in danger of being overlooked. Since our roots in 1812, we've been a community providing real care for those who are poor, frail, lonely, disconnected and marginalised in Sydney and throughout New South Wales.
The Methodist Church in Australia began in 1812 when Edward Eager, a convict, and two other freemen got together to discuss the establishment of the church. They wrote to Britain to the Methodist Church there and said, "Send us a preacher, lest we die in our sins." The church developed and grew from that time, and it was actually in 1815 that the Reverend Samuel Lee arrived to establish the Methodist work in the colony. Initially it was at the Princes Street Chapel beneath what are now the approaches to the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and it grew through class meetings and built up members in their faith and kept them together. And that's gone on in small groups right to this very day. Edward Eager and the other laymen in the church were involved in the setting up of many other organisations. They helped in the setting up of the Bible Society and established the Sydney Benevolent Society to care for those who were in need or poor, neglected children, widows, convicts and drunken seamen. In 1844, the church had to build a larger chapel in the city, which became affectionately known as Old York Street. This church grew greatly in numbers, but then hit a time of decline.
Things came to a head at the Methodist Conference in 1884. A decision was taken to close down the old church and sell it, giving the proceeds to the outer suburban churches. Just as the vote was about to be taken, an old Methodist by the name of the Reverend George Hurst jumped to his feet and said, "Sell it? Never! God helping us, never! Have we lost our vision? Have we lost our evangelistic fervour, our faith?" In a stirring speech, he called for an evangelist to be put in charge.
A young minister by the name of William George Taylor from Glebe was appointed. He was given 1 year to revive the church. He was a man at the time in indifferent health, and when he told his doctor about this potential appointment, the doctor said to him, "If you go to that appointment at that church, you better take your coffin with you." He came and realised that if he was going to meet the needs of the people of Sydney, he needed a new name, Central Methodist Mission. He gave it a new slogan, "A living Christ for a dying world." It was a new policy of committed evangelism and also serving the practical needs of people in the community. And this was a model that was replicated around the world. Sydney at that time had a substantial floating population of dock and seasonal workers, seamen, migrants, the unemployed, plus many of its industrial workforce who lived in cheap, low-grade boarding houses in and close to the city. Alongside its vigorous evangelistic activity, the Central Methodist Mission began to serve these people through the establishment of many centres. There was a seaman's mission, a work amongst alcoholics, a home for the orphaned and neglected children, an evangelist training institute, a home for sisters of the people who worked among the poor, a medical institute, and a home for young women in need. Within just 2 years, the Central Methodist Mission had outgrown Old York Street and built Centenary Hall in York Street. At the turn of the century, it couldn't cope with the size of the congregation in that hall either. Taylor had found that a neutral building attracted more people, and after weighing up the merits of building what some would have wanted, a Methodist cathedral, the church began to move into the Lyceum property in Pitt Street in 1905. The Lyceum Theatre and its adjoining property were purchased by Ebenezer Vickery, a generous Methodist benefactor, and the purpose was not only for his own business use, but for the church's use. This move placed Central Methodist Mission right at the heart of the city, next to the pubs and brothels of Pitt Street. After 22 years and a long period of illness, the Reverend W.G. Taylor retired in 1913. The Reverend P.J. Stephen, who had in fact been a colleague of Taylor for 5 years, became the next superintendent. He laid a strong foundation with the inauguration of what was the annual Spring Fair, a fundraising event which has run for more than 100 consecutive years at Wesley Mission, now known as Wesley Fair. Stevens also began the Pleasant Sunday Afternoon programme, which was often described as PSA. and this attracted people who didn't usually attend church and came to hear a variety of talks with performances. However, Stephen was forced to retire for health reasons after just 1 year in the job. His successor was Reverend Samuel J. Hoban, who began his ministry on the first Anzac Day, the 25th of April 1915. In the dark days of World War I and those that followed, congregations in Australia built up at an unprecedented rate. People's spirits needed to be lifted in this war period. It was Hoban who met returning wounded soldiers at the wharf. He held church parades for them. Throughout the war, he held patriotic, pleasant Sunday afternoon programmes with topics like German brute force versus Christianity and alcohol, the Huns' ally. Hoban was deeply loved and greatly respected as a preacher, and there was widespread regret throughout Sydney when in 1921 he transferred to the Central Methodist Mission in Melbourne. The Reverend H.C. Foreman succeeded him, and for a 10-year term, Clifton Foreman was concerned with the problems of the unstable industrial situation of the 1920s between employers and employees. The Central Methodist Mission opened a men's hostel, providing working men with cheap accommodation and safety from the streets and hotels. The Sydney Night Refuge, which sheltered homeless men and later provided a hostel with a place for clothing distribution, was consolidated. A home for frail older women called Sunset Lodge was established in Burwood, and the Dalmar Children's Home was erected at Carlingford. Foreman retired in 1931.
The gap between unemployment and employment is a no man's land where pain, misery, unhappiness and despair rule the day and the night for many. Those who are forced to live upon government relief allowances, who pay high rents, who try unsuccessfully to follow the high cost of living, find the mission's evening distribution of food a great boon.
The 1930s came, and of course that was the time of the Depression. This was when the appointment of the Reverend Rupert Williams was made. R.J. Williams would be the minister for the next 6 years. Despite many difficulties, he ensured ongoing social work to rescue the victims of the Great Depression. In spite of grave financial problems, the Stewart's Infants Home was added at Dalmar, and additions were built for girls who were employed in the city. Wesley Chapel was created at the same time for the church's morning worship service. In 1938, the Reverend F.H. Raywood was appointed superintendent. Work among older people was relatively new, and during Frank Raywood's time, Waddell House, Sylvania Homes and the Lottie Stewart Hospital were created to provide accommodation and health care for people. As in World War I, we again provided a ministry of courage and comfort to soldiers and people at large during World War II. A group was formed to knit and sew for the troops, and the pleasant Sunday afternoon programme also addressed patriotic themes such as Australia's war aims and even the work of the railways and the war effort. The Central Methodist Mission took the opportunity to expand its services with extensions to its aged care facilities at Burwood and Narrabeen, to Dalmar and the men's hostel. Despite a great deal of public pressure to stay, Dr. Raywood resigned in 1958. Up to this time, the church had worked from a certain kind of 19th century style of evangelism, which was directly personal without confronting the social system that was responsible for the individual's plight. The 1960s required a totally new response. Racism, foreign ownership, technological advances, communism, the generation gap, and our ties with Asia and America meant Australia was faced with rapid social change. The Central Methodist Mission needed to become part of the social conscience of the city, trying to prevent injustice while continuing to care for its victims. A new 20th century style of evangelism, combining evangelism and social witness from a theological framework, was what was required. The catalyst for this radical change was the next superintendent, the Reverend Dr. Alan Walker, who was appointed amid great controversy in 1958.
We may say that Alan Walker and other Christian preachers of this city will be the conscience of Sydney. And we've heard on the very best authority stated tonight that those who in political circles and in social leadership have a care for the future of this city are deeply concerned that there should be more and more leadership, and that men like Alan Walker should be the conscience of this city.
Alan Walker ensured media interest in the whole new approach he was bringing. He organised an impressive Welcome to Sydney event staged at Sydney Town Hall. The attendance was something like 2,500 people, according to the Sydney Morning Herald. And just before the service, Alan Walker received a card. In it were these words:
Plough deeply, expect much, am with you daily in prayer, W.G. Taylor. I think perhaps that message is our message tonight, as we say it one to the other. And there's a pledge at its heart, a pledge of prayer. Shall we go forward in that conviction and with that commitment? Plough deeply, expect much, and let us say to each other and keep it, am with you daily in prayer.
Sunday by Sunday, evangelism in the Lyceum, with a regular call to commitment to Christ, was to be his first priority. The Easter Mission was inaugurated in 1959. It began modestly, but grew to become a major Christian thrust into the heart of the city of Sydney. Its programme ran from Palm Sunday through to Easter Sunday. After 2 years, the programme expanded, and in 1961, the first Easter Day sunrise service was held at the North Ryde Drive-In Theatre. It was telecast live with a repeat in the evening. The week-long Easter Mission continues at Wesley Mission today after well over 50 years.
Christ is risen.
Under Alan Walker's direction, the Central Methodist Mission became a 7-day-a-week church, caring for the isolated and the lonely in the city, all day, every day. The Epworth Press Building in Castlereagh Street became available and was converted into Fellowship House. It provided a hall, club premises and eating facilities for lonely people who had come in off the street. However, there were problems, and having a building physically separated from the church's headquarters was the challenge. The situation, however, was to change dramatically in a most unexpected way. At 6 a.m. on the 25th of February 1964, Alan Walker was informed at home that the Lyceum Theatre was on fire. The whole building was gutted. Over breakfast, he was offered the use of the State Theatre free of charge for Sunday services and also for Good Friday until the Lyceum was rebuilt. By midday, he had a tentative report on the redevelopment, and in 3 months, plans were announced for a 7-storey building facing Pitt Street with a new arcade of shops. Alan Walker saw this as an opportunity to bring all the church's activities under one roof.
From the State Theatre in Market Street, representatives of 11 different denominations marched to the opening of Sydney's newest theatre, the Lyceum. Thousands crowd Pitt Street for the official opening, which is attended by the Reverend Alan Walker and the President of the New South Wales Methodist Conference, the Reverend S.M. Barrett. The Lord Mayor, Alderman Armstrong, is among distinguished guests at the opening. The Lyceum will be used for the pleasant Sunday afternoon meetings and evening worship of the Central Methodist Mission, and during the week by Greater Union Theatres for screening films. The official opening is performed by the State Governor, Sir Roden Cutler, V.C. A magnificent new theatre in the heart of Sydney, dedicated as a place of worship and officially opened by the Governor.
The prominent generation of the 60s and 70s was for the first time a generation of young people. Walker recognised their need of love and a place to belong, and through unique programmes such as Teenage Cabaret, he was able to reach out to this formerly neglected social group.
The Central Methodist Mission Fellowship House in Sydney starts a Saturday night Teenage Cabaret. There's a capacity crowd of 550 teenagers, and the £65,000 community centre is really jumping. He waggles his pelvis better than Elvis. The 3 floors in the cabaret include a chapel above the dance floor, where teenagers and others can go to meditate while the cabaret continues 1 floor below. The Reverend Alan Walker devised the cabaret to give teenagers something to do in a Christian atmosphere. And there's nothing killjoy about this kind of religion. Part of the floor show in real teenage style is provided by the New South Wales rock and roll champions, Mickey DeBono and Judy Cleaver. The youngsters have a great time. And if those tapping feet mean anything, Alan Walker doesn't knock the rock either. Sydney's Teenage Cabaret, designed to keep the younger generation off the street.
Walker saw the electronic media as the modern equivalent of the open-air service of Taylor's Day. A new half-hour programme called Challenge the Minister was televised over a period of 7 years.
My first word this afternoon must be that we would give you a word of gratitude for allowing us to come here to your union headquarters and for you to form the audience at this lunchtime period.
His extensive use of the media was unique. He attracted both praise and criticism for his dynamic leadership and willingness to speak out. His prophetic ministry dealt with many of the period's issues, such as nuclear energy, the all-white Australia policy, apartheid, conscription, and of course the Vietnam War. But other issues such as unemployment, abortion, and birth control also took his concern. As the Central Methodist Mission showed care and concern for the desperate needs of the community, people responded.
Lifeline was born when we discovered the power of the telephone.
Lifeline would soon spread worldwide. Later Youthline, a youth-to-youth counselling service, would be added. Vision Valley, a new country and leisure centre, was considered by Alan to be one of his major achievements. During the latter part of Walker's term, Wesley Centre proved too difficult a financial burden, but despite this, the church didn't hesitate to deal with the needs of neglected groups within the Sydney community. One new activity was the School for Seniors, which provided education and activity programmes, initially for 1 day a week for retired people. The other was the Sydney Singles Society, launched to provide fellowship, create activities, social and intellectual life linked to the Christian church for singles of all ages. In 1978, the Reverend Dr. Sir Alan Walker left to take on responsibility as a World Methodist evangelist. The Reverend Gordon Moyes from Victoria arrived to be the next superintendent. The Central Methodist Mission at that stage underwent a huge change because there was the union of 3 denominations, the Methodist, the Presbyterian and the Congregational churches, which all united. They formed the Uniting Church of Australia, and our name once again changed to Wesley Mission, Sydney.
Despite the change in name, Wesley Mission continued to reach out to the poor and to those in need throughout Sydney and beyond. Gordon Moyes also had a keen interest in the media. He continued the work Alan Walker began in television and radio, producing a wide range of television shows, documentaries and media programming. During his 27 years as superintendent, Gordon was a great advocate for those in need, continuing to build public awareness on issues such as credit card debt, unemployment and youth homelessness. He expanded employment services through Wesley Uniting Employment and established Credit Line, a free counselling service for those in financial stress. He also oversaw the development of the old Lyceum Theatre in 1988. A new building was designed and built on the site of the old Lyceum, which we presently occupy. It contains a theatre, church, our head office, the Wesley Conference Centre and shops. These were significant days of building development and helped us to advance our work in a quite unprecedented way. And my period as superintendent began when Gordon retired at the end of 2005. The Church of God is very much alive at the heart of Sydney, Australia. I arrived here in Australia in August 2005 to take up the next responsibility as superintendent at the beginning of 2006. This was after 25 years as a Methodist minister in the United Kingdom. I worked in Devon, in the northeast of England and in North Wales before eventually becoming responsible for the Methodist work in the northern part of Greater Manchester and into Lancashire. I'm now an Aussie, very much part of the Wesley Mission family, where I work alongside volunteers, our staff and wonderful congregations as we all seek to rise to the challenge of being a 24/7 mission in the 21st century.
It is remarkable to see how things have grown at Wesley Mission. We opened our first employment agency in 1890, more than 120 years ago. Today we seek to provide help and training to help some of the same kind of people. Wesley Dalmar's work with children and young people that began in a home for 20 children has been operating for more than 120 years. Today, hundreds of children and their families are supported each year through Wesley's out-of-home care services, our family services and early intervention programs. Training and education have been and continue to be a vital part of Wesley Mission's services. The Evangelist Training Institute began in 1889, and since then we've continued to educate and train people, more recently through Wesley Vocational Institute, which offers accredited qualifications for those wishing to enter the workforce or add to their own skills. And Wesley Employment and Training works closely with employers and industry to ensure job seekers are ready and trained to meet employment needs. It was more than 85 years ago that our first aged care facility opened, and services for older people now include services in the community for those who wish to live at home, as well as many facilities and retirement living options. Lifeline, this vital crisis telephone service, has now spread to various parts of the world and celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2012. Wesley Vision Valley has been operating as a camp and conference centre for more than 40 years, as has our own David Morgan Centre, which offers supported employment for people with disability. Disability services have expanded at Wesley Mission to include accommodation, supported employment, respite and life skills training. Our television ministry also continues its 50-year tradition. Today we produce weekly television shows, One Wesley Impact TV, as well as a regular preaching programme. Wesley Mission's mental health services have grown and expanded with our specialised private hospitals and in the area of suicide prevention through Wesley Life Force. Counselling is also an important part of Wesley Mission, and each year our gambling counselling and financial counselling services help many people who are struggling. More recently, we've developed a financial literacy programme that aims to help people manage their money and avoid getting into debt. More than ever, Wesley Mission is committed in the space of homelessness. We're providing care for the homeless through a variety of services and centres like Wesley Edward Eager Lodge and our facilities in other places, providing accommodation for homeless families. Here we seek to give people more than just a roof over their heads and meals to eat. We're meeting the changes in work with the homeless by our own response today.
We have in excess of 2,000 staff and about 4,000 volunteers. And with 10 congregations with many worshippers, we're all together seeking to follow in the footsteps of those who've gone before, caring for those who are poor and sharing the generous love of Jesus Christ without fear or favour. And while the way we do things may be rather different, we continue to offer a message of hope, inspired by grace, as we seek to serve the Australian community today.